Now, I first want to warn you that there will be major spoilers ahead for Avengers Endgame, so if you haven't seen the movie yet, please do yourself a favor and click away and watch it first, and then you can come back to this video at a later point. That little warning out of the way, what I want to do in this video is discuss how I'm almost positive time travel works in the MCU. And I say that because there are a few things that the movie doesn't really make clear and we're left to speculate on the answer. So as always, after the video, please feel free to share your own theories about how time travel works, or try and reconstruct or deconstruct the one I'm about to present. Okay, so first of all, the movie tries to make it very clear that in the MCU, you cannot change the past. You can't, for example, create what's essentially a time machine and just go back in time and change previous events that will then change what is in the present you left. The Avengers can't go back using the machine they do indeed build to simply stop Thanos before he ever assembles the stones and snaps his fingers, because that has already happened in the primary timeline and there's no changing it. So when our heroes jump back in time, or more accurately, they enter the quantum realm via the machine they've built, they're actually creating a whole new parallel universe that is identical to the one they come from, and then they're going to a moment in it that is identical to one in their past. This then means they themselves are progressing on a linear track, that their future just happens to look like their past. But it's not their past at all, and so no matter what they do in it, it won't affect their own reality that they just came from. But it will cause this alternate reality to quickly diverge and change from what they know is supposed to happen, or what did happen in their own reality. That's why things that happened when they went back, like Cap saying "Hail Hydra" in the elevator to get the staff, or having a fight with his younger self, hasn't or doesn't change things in what was their present, or in the time and place they initially left from, or what we would call the main timeline. It's happening in a different reality altogether. Otherwise, the Captain America we've always known and watched in these movies should and would remember that encounter with his younger self, though he would remember it as having a strange fight shortly after the Battle of New York with someone who looked just like him, though a little bit older, and who also told him that Bucky was alive. But clearly, he doesn't remember any of that because it was always part of his future, never a part of his past. And then when he uses the wrist device to return, he's going back to the reality he originally left from, where only a few moments have passed. He's not going into the future of the one he was in and had created, and though the movie doesn't entirely make this clear, one way or the other really, it seems like under normal circumstances, this parallel universe that's created will collapse back into the main timeline or cease to be once the person who created it has left. Or that maybe it somehow self-corrects itself and goes back to the way it was supposed to be. For example here, let's say while they were testing the machine, they decided to send Hawkeye back in time just 1 minute, and they'd send him back to the very same spot where the machine is located in Avengers headquarters. Now you might then think that Hawkeye would show up 1 minute before he actually leaves, and most likely while they were preparing the machine to actually send him back in time. But he never would show up to them. The Hawkeye who leaves is never going to encounter his true past self. Instead, he'll create a whole new parallel reality and show up to a different set of Avengers and a different Hawkeye that would be created the moment he goes into the machine and comes out the other side, if you will. This then means that paradoxes cannot happen in the MCU because, though why he would do this I don't know, but if Hawkeye went back in time 1 minute and immediately killed himself upon arrival, or killed the version of himself from 1 minute ago, it wouldn't affect anything because he hadn't actually killed himself from the past, but rather it was only a version of himself from an alternate reality, and one that is in his future or present, and not at all from his past. And hopefully that made sense. Basically what I'm saying here is you don't go into the past at all. You're just going into an alternate reality that looks like your past, and though again the movie doesn't make this 100% clear, it seems like that new reality only exists as long as you're there. That is, unless an Infinity Stone is taken out of an alternate timeline, and that's because the Ancient One tells us that they're kind of the foundation of everything, or what keeps everything in place and transpiring as it should. They're like the bedrock of the universe, and when you take one out, even out of an alternate timeline, that reality becomes a genuine split from the main timeline and becomes, well, real for all intents and purposes. And then it has to deal with the repercussions of not having that stone around anymore. And in the case of the time stone being removed from that reality, it means that Doctor Strange would not have it to stop Dormammu, and the Earth would eventually be plunged into darkness. However, if that stone is returned to the exact moment it's taken from, that split will cease to exist once the person who has returned it has left. And if I'm right, Captain America, who is the one who returns all 6 stones once they're done with them, doesn't have to return them to the physical spot in that reality they were taken from, just to the actual moment in time, so that, chronologically, as Banner says, it's like they never left. And then when he leaves and all the stones are still there, the parallel universe either ceases to be or self-corrects itself somehow. And I think this is the case, that the universe will either cease to be or self-correct itself once the stone simply re-enters the timeline at the right point. Because, first of all, it seems like it would be damn near impossible for Captain America to return those stones to the exact moment and place they were taken from without causing further problems for that timeline. Because speaking of that, in one timeline they already let Loki get away with the Tesseract, and who knows how that would affect things. In other words, I understand the Avengers want to bring back everyone they lost in their timeline, everyone that got snapped away by Thanos, I mean. But if these other timelines are just as real as their own, would they truly risk the fate of an entire universe to save their own? That doesn't sound very Avengers-like. I mean, anything could have and did go wrong when they took the stones from those other realities. I mentioned Loki a moment ago, and we have no idea how that will affect things in the long run for that timeline. Though I suppose it's not very pleasant to think that they're creating an alternate reality in order to take a stone, and then they use it for their own purposes, before returning the stone to destroy that reality they created. They're basically doing a double Thanos by blinking out everyone in that existence. Which means I think the best possibility to believe here is that when the stone is simply put back in the timeline of that alternate reality, everything just self-corrects and goes on as it should have, though again, I'm not sure the movie makes it entirely clear what happens, and that's understandable because you don't want to spend huge chunks of the movie trying to explain every tiny little detail. And something else the movie doesn't make clear, or one huge question it raises, is if you cannot change the past of your own reality, or the main timeline I should say, how then did Captain America seemingly go back into the past of the main timeline? If he went back to be with Peggy Carter, doesn't that just mean he created an alternate reality and was never technically with, quote-unquote, his Peggy Carter, the one from his own reality or the one from the main MCU that we've seen before? I mean, if my theory here is right, in my Hawkeye example, he would have went back into the past a minute, and assuming he stayed longer than a minute, he would have caught up in time with the moment he left. However, as I said, he would have never shown up to anyone in the main timeline, or those Avengers he'd left behind. Again, he would have gone to an alternate timeline and showed up to a whole different set of Avengers. Which means Cap should have gone back to an alternate timeline and showed up to, technically, a whole different Peggy Carter, though one who would still have all her memories and such. And yet the movie implies Cap has actually gone back in time, that he's apparently gone back to the past of the main timeline, lived out his life, and caught up with the current events, which shouldn't be possible, again going back to the Hawkeye example. He shouldn't be sitting on that park bench unless he just recently came back from a parallel universe, which sadly means he was never with the same Peggy Carter that he originally met and fell in love with. However, there just might be a way that he was with that Peggy Carter and lived out his life in the main MCU timeline and not an alternate one. Because there is one thing that does seemingly have the ability to truly change events in the past of the main timeline, and that is, of course, the Time Stone. And this is where one of many things could have happened, and what I think is the most likely is that when Captain America returned the Time Stone to the Ancient One, he would have then asked her to send him back into his own past on the main timeline. Now, is that even possible? Well, why not, I suppose? Because if a split or alternate reality occurs from the moment the Traveler arrives, which is what the Ancient One shows Bruce Banner in the movie, well, in theory, if that Traveler got sent backwards in time from that point via the Time Stone, or sent back on their own linear path in a way, they would be going backwards into their own past and back through the main timeline, meaning that Cap ended up with the Peggy Carter from his reality, and it was all kept one big secret. And this would also really begin to explain why the Ancient One and others who guard the Time Stone take their responsibility so very seriously. It's the one stone that can actually change the past, whereas all the others can only change the present. Which might then make you ask, would the Ancient One actually do this for Captain America? Would she send him back into the past? Well, in theory, and I feel like I've been saying that a lot in this video, She would have always done this, meaning she could have used the time stone to look back into the past to see that Steve Rogers had always been there and that she was the one who facilitated it. Which, in a strange way, kind of means she's not changing the past. She's making sure it plays out as it needs to, and that Captain America in the main timeline has always been there hiding and living out his life with Peggy Carter. And if you ask why he let all these horrible things happen, why he didn't change certain things, well, it's simply because he knew if he did that, he might undo their ultimate victory in 2023. And as I said before, there are of course other possibilities as to how Captain America got back into the actual main timeline, all of which involve him or someone else sending him back via the time stone. Either way, as far as I can figure it, that's about the only way he could have been able to sit on that park bench at the end of the movie. Assuming again that he didn't, shortly before we see him there, live out his whole life in a parallel universe. But if he did that, and he left that universe, that might mean he collapsed the whole damn thing, and his family, his kids, grandkids, and so on, would have blinked out of existence. Or it also might have self-corrected itself. And if neither one of those things happened, then it actually means the Avengers did probably screw up some alternate realities, since they didn't automatically collapse or self-correct upon leaving, which means Loki has the Tesseract somewhere in an alternate reality, and well, again, that's not cool. Anyway, I think we can safely assume that somehow, someway, Captain America used the time stone, or someone used it for him, and he went back into his own past, where he got the dance and a life with Peggy Carter, and we can just leave it at that. And what's kind of curious here, and the movie never touches on this, is what repercussions there might be to the main MCU timeline as a result of Thanos destroying the stone, since they are what holds everything in place, as the Ancient One said. And what might be interesting is if, by destroying them, Thanos somehow made it possible for the Avengers to do what they did, that they were then able to take the stones from a parallel universe and bring them back into the main universe. And if that's the case, it might mean only one of each stone can exist in a reality at one time, which would probably be for the best considering how confusing this already is. Well, that's all I've got for this time, and hopefully this made some sense and wasn't too confusing. And as I said at the start, by all means, tell me your theory or let me know if you think this one is good, or if there's some holes that you think maybe you can plug. Either way, let me know in the comments below and let's talk some Marvel. And until next time, thanks for watching.